opening shot, the U.S. House took a big vote today that pit lawmakers against each other. No, I'm not talking about Epstein. Moments after that Epstein vote, the House passed a resolution condemning Illinois Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia for the way he chose to bow out of his re-election race. Now, the sponsor of a resolution, a fellow Democratic Congresswoman, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez from Washington State, she was the sponsor. The resolution called Garcia's actions, quote, beneath the dignity of the office and incompatible with the spirit of the United States Constitution. It passed by a 236 to 183 vote with nearly all Republicans and 23 Democrats. Now, Congressman Garcia came under fire for announcing he would not seek re-election right at the deadline for any candidate to turn in their nominating petitions. And no Democrat filed to run, except for Garcia's chief of staff, Patty Garcia, no relation, who was able to get advance notice, obviously, and turn in her petitions before the deadline. Now, Gluesenkamp-Perez took offense to the classic Chicago-style maneuver.
I like Chuy Garcia. I think his reasons for retiring are noble. We are not here to adjudicate the character of Chuy Garcia. I'm asking the body to consider a set of facts laid before us tonight about how he chose his successor and deprived Americans the right to choose their elected representative.
In response to all of this, Congressman Garcia's office issued this quote-unquote fact sheet saying, despite Representative Gluesenkamp-Perez's repeated claims to the contrary, Garcia did not circulate petitions for any congressional campaign except his own. The other Democratic candidates circulated her own petitions and earned support from constituents whose voices should not be silenced by this resolution. Anyone at any time before the filing deadline could have collected petitions and filed to run, which is exactly what several candidates did, one of whom filed as a Republican and the other with the working class party. Anyone willing to file as a Democrat could have filed petitions before his announcement. Now, Representative Gluesenkamp-Perez might not be familiar with Chicago's illustrious history of bequeathing public office seats to successors, sometimes family members. Remember former Alderman Dick Mell? He resigned early so the mayor could pick his daughter, Deb Mell, to replace him. Or Alderman Walter Burnett also resigned early so Mayor Johnson could replace him with, you guessed it, his son, Walter Redmond Burnett. Now, judging by the national outcry at this move, Illinois lawmakers might want to stiffen up election and campaign laws to ensure these sneaky procedures cease in the future. But the public shaming Garcia is receiving might be a warning for our local electeds to think twice when they're getting ready to call it a career and think that they, and not necessarily the voters, should install their chosen successor.
Tonight, Congress votes to release all of the Department of Justice Epstein files after a stunning about-face from Trump, who campaigned on releasing them, then not releasing them, and then decided, okay, go ahead. An Evanston pastor who was arrested and physically assaulted by federal immigration agents tells his story and why he believes faith leaders should speak up.
Welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Paris Schutz. The public might soon know most or all of the sordid details that the U.S. Department of Justice has kept on the sex trafficking activities of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this comes after President Trump's multiple about-faces. Today, a group of survivors stood outside the U.S. Capitol with their reaction.
I am traumatized. I am not stupid. You have put us through so much stress, the lockdowns, the halt of these procedures that were supposed to have happened 50 days ago. The Adelita Grijalva who waited to get sworn in and then get upset when your own party goes against you because what is being done is wrong. It's not right.
And joining us fresh off this vote is Illinois Congressman Jonathan Jackson of the Southside 2nd Congressional District. Or is it the 1st Congressional District?
First.
Okay.
First Congressional District.
Because your brother's running for the 2nd. Okay, Congressman, so first of all, it was a unanimous consent vote. Your reaction after Speaker Johnson had, for weeks, said that he was reluctant to call this vote.
Yes, this was long past due. These women have gone through 5 administrations of the executive branch or president seats and have not been heard. I thought, frankly, we would have been a little further along in our society and our life and knowing that we have to trust women's voice. Almost 1 in 3 women in America have experienced some sort of physical violation, groping, or sexual unwanted advancement. And so this was a big day for women's rights, for human decency, and it should not have taken this long. Many members in the Republican Party campaigned on releasing the files, so they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar, and some of them had to live up to their words. They tried to backpedal, backtrack, and so finally we see some daylight and some justice not far away. We've not gotten there yet. I'm sure the president will find another procedural tool, such as beginning to investigate other members. Also, there's rumors that they're scrubbing Republican names out of these files, and they put this focus on other Democrats at this time. And they're going to say, you can't release this because now it's in the Justice Department and there's continuing ongoing investigation. So we want to stop all of that foolishness. Let these women have justice so they can move on with their lives.
What happens then in that case? Because the president did say he's directing his DOJ to investigate certain Democratic officials and their connections to Epstein. And so the DOJ could say, as you said, well, we can't release these files because they're part of an ongoing investigation. So then what does the House do?
Well, that's more deflection, distraction, and this is the president's move. I wouldn't be surprised if he started trying to bomb another country tonight. It's all about massive distraction, and I think people have now finally caught up to what he's doing. So it would be out of the House's hands. It would now be the president directing his Justice Department, not the American People's Justice Department. He will try to further delay. When he says, go ahead and vote, he doesn't mean he wants to see the results and does not want to see the files come through. He is still maintaining that very position of not releasing the files. I'm sure there are some things that are incredibly embarrassing for quite a few people, but there were a lot of women that have been exploited, and I'm sure there's a lot of young men, some boys that have been exploited, and the horrors that are yet to be seen will be shocking.
That's what I was going to ask you is what do you expect to see that hasn't already been revealed, for instance, in this latest subpoena and dump from Democrats on the Oversight Committee that kind of revealed all those emails?
Well, it's chilling to think Miss Giuffre, she seemed to be in good spirits, and all of a sudden she's had a suicide. 2 minutes are missing from the Epstein videotapes at the federal correction, and they said he committed a suicide. So we don't know how many deaths may happen by suicide or by accident, but it's horrific. And so we just hope that we speed up getting all this information out so these young ladies can now have justice, and they can have a sense of satisfaction that justice was served, that no one is above the law, and they certainly were not to be treated beneath the law. So I am saying this was a very momentous day, that no one's above the law. When you think about what they're doing, Paris, he had this big island, private planes, yachts to go from St. John Island to traffic people over there, a 24-hour place of debauchery. It just didn't stop. And how many young girls had been permanently violated? And so to see the victims now speak up and show their teenage photos, it was chilling. And to hear their testimonies, they're not the saints, but at least they can see justice in their lifetime. That's my hope. That's my goal. That's my prayer for them.
And certainly it takes a lot of courage, and we're going to get into that with our next guest, to speak up in the face of so many powerful abusers and alleged abusers. I want to switch gears to what happened right afterward. You know, you've defended your friend and colleague Jesus Chuy Garcia, who came under fire from a fellow Democrat for the way he chose to hang it up and appearing to anoint a successor here. What do you make of the vote that condemned him?
Yeah, that was inappropriate, and it's nothing like traitors in our own party. Miss Perez Gusenkamp, she was wrong. Mr. Chuy Garcia has served for 45 years in elected office. He's played by the rules, above the board. I also mentioned in my speech in honor of Mr. Garcia last night that I remember in 1997 when he was the chair, if you will, of the Senate Black Caucus for the state of Illinois. And I remember when in the late 70s, early 80s, when the word Hispanic was being created. There are no Hispanics in Mexico. There are Mexicans in Mexico. That's an American made up name. Chewy has always been a part of the African American community. And when he spoke at Harold Washington's funeral, and he's always stood beside us, marched with us as a community of working class people, for those that have been down and out, for the laborers. And so he's an honorable man. To see this woman, this fellow congresswoman, try to besmirch and tarnish his character and reputation, she cannot. So I felt compelled to speak up for Chewy, for all that he's done. And he explained himself clearly. He says his wife has multiple sclerosis, which is nobody's business. He has to adopt his grandchild because his daughter died. It was very heart moving and heart wrenching. And he says he'll be 70 next spring. And so he's decided not to run. And so I applaud his chief of staffs who got the petitions. He did not get her on the ballot. She ran, and anybody's welcome to run at any given time. So I congratulate Chewy for a life of public service, well lived, and thank him for also living by his family values. He said it's time for him to leave the Congress and go home to deal with his family. And I respect him for that.
All right. Speaking of family, just before I let you go, how's your father, Reverend Jesse Jackson, doing?
Paris, I thank you. I thank everyone in Chicagoland and people around the country that have prayed for him. Prayer works. We've had some good news. He's had an upgrade in his condition from ICU back to the regular hospital room, and he's giving out instructions. He wants to make sure the government is feeding people. He wants me to organize churches that they can have food drives. So Dad is still moving. He's working.
Still working as always. We know that he never takes his eye off the ball. All right, Congressman Jackson, very good to hear. We're glad for your father, and we certainly are praying and hoping for his continued health. Thanks so much.
Prayer works. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Bye-bye.
And today's vote caps off a roller coaster of emotions for all survivors of sexual abuse. Joining us now is Kimberly McGee. She is a sexual abuse survivor and member of the Mayor's Task Force on Gender-Based Violence. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us. So your reaction now to this unanimous vote, given the fact that it seemed like President Trump and Republicans had been dragging their heels for many weeks on this.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Paris. This represents more than a legal action. You know, it's a statement that truth should no longer be hidden. And survivors have lived for years knowing that people who harmed them were shielded by systems and institutions and influence. Sometimes the very institutions that were designed to protect survivors ended up, shielding their offenders or abusers or folks that cause harm. And so this decision is huge. And the unanimous way in which it was passed speaks volumes. And so it breaks that pattern that truth should no longer be hidden.
Does it, give us a sense of how difficult it is to do what some of these women did today and have done in front of the Capitol many times, which is speak out publicly, especially, when they're accusing some of the most powerful men in the world?
Oh, wow. What a great question, Paris. It is tremendously difficult to talk about what happened to you because it is so deeply personal. We're talking about someone's personal sense of safety, sense of self was compromised, was destroyed. It takes so much to just come forward to even report. We know statistically that more than half of violence and gender-based violence is not even reported. And so to even get to the stage of reporting and then going through a trial is just monumental. It's devastating. It touches every area of your life. Some survivors deal with such a huge sense of shame and stigma. We talk about a lot on the citywide task force how survivors are constantly dealing with the sense of shame and guilt, thinking that they could have done something to prevent what happened to them, and that's impossible because it was the responsibility of someone else's actions. So it takes a lot to come forward as a survivor.
Certainly, as we see the women there talking and hoping that there is some resolution and some clarity and transparency to these files. You know, we mentioned you serve on the mayor's task force on gender-based violence. What are the biggest challenges you see in the city of Chicago when it relates to gender-based violence?
Wow, some of the biggest, well, right now, one of the biggest challenge was funding. And I'm very grateful that Mayor Brandon Johnson decided to fund the domestic violence and gender-based violence services at $21 million. But we know that, more needs to be done. There's still more survivors that are not helped, that are turned away. And we know this, like this is data. Many of the citywide services that are providing, peer-to-peer services, funding, legal services, they sometimes are full. We know that like beds for families fleeing shelter are full. Sometimes people are turned away. So this is great that it was restored to, I think, 21 million. But honestly, it needs to be more. And earlier in September, I spoke at a subject matter hearing, and several alders supported raising and even doubling that amount. Of course, that didn't happen, but that just says there's still so much more that needs to be done. Funding is always a huge challenge.
Absolutely. What percentage, I mean, would you guess of women perhaps don't come forward or are afraid to come forward or keep this hidden because they don't feel safe? How big a problem is that?
I would say, just from my personal experience, so many women and some men come to me and tell me that they've been violated, they were abused, they never reported, varying levels of non-reporting. Either they told their family members and their family didn't believe them, or their family knew and didn't want to do anything, or just not reporting. I would guess, Paris, that it is more than half. So, if the statistics are that, 1 in 3 people have been a victim or survivor of gender-based violence, then I mean the statistics are astronomical for the folks who don't report.
That would definitely, if it's more than half, that would certainly be a large number. All right, Kimberly McGee, survivor and a member of the mayor's task force on gender-based violence. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me, Paris.
You got it. And when we come back, an Evanston reverend who was arrested and kneed in the back by federal immigration officials on Friday speaks out.